Welcome to the world of science fiction and forgotten worlds. Alien Universe. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and never miss a new movies and story from this channel. If a whole planet could cry, would you hear it? Or would you call? It noise? On Colony Arda-7, nobody listened. The air tasted like metal. The crops were dying row by row, and the oxygen alarms beeped so often that people stopped reacting. The council said the problem was failing soil, broken filters, bad luck. But the people needed a simpler answer, a smaller answer, someone they could point at and blame. So they chose the silent boy. His name was Kaiao. He was 9 years old, thin, pale, and he had never spoken a single word in his life. Not when he was hungry, not when other children pushed him, not even when the doctors flashed bright lights into his eyes and asked him to respond. They wrote nonverbal in his file like it was a defect. The neighbors called him strange. Some said plants wilted when he walked past. Others said animals avoided him. No one noticed that he always sat with his hand on the ground as if he was listening to something deep below the metal floors. The colony was running out of food, and fear makes people cruel. In the central hall, under cold white lights, Governor Hall made the decision. We cannot waste oxygen on a child who gives nothing back, he said. The crowd agreed too quickly. No one wanted to be the one who defended a boy who never even said thank you. 2 guards took Kaiao by the arms. He did not fight. He did not cry. He just looked once at the floor, like he was hearing a distant voice calling his name. At the back of the room stood Rowan Voss, a terraformer who spent more time outside the dome than inside it. He worked with soil, water, and air, trying to make dead land breathe again. Lately, the ground had felt wrong to him, like it was holding its breath. When the guards dragged Kaiao past him, Rowan felt a strange vibration under his boots, a low hum that no one else seemed to notice. He frowned, but said nothing. The council had already decided. The outer gate opened with a long hiss. Beyond it stretched red dust, sharp heat, and empty horizon. Exile on Arda-7 was not a punishment. It was a slow death. The guards pushed Kaiao forward, read the order, and turned back without looking at him again. The gate closed. Just like that, the boy was no longer part of the colony. Rowan stayed by the glass longer than he should have. Inside, people walked away, relieved, as if removing one quiet child would somehow fix failing crops and cracking machines. Outside, Kaiao stood alone in the dust. Then he did something that made Rowan's heart pound. The boy knelt and placed his palm on the ground. For 3 seconds, the dying plants inside the agriculture bay lifted their leaves. Only a little, only for a moment. But Rowan saw it clearly through the glass. The stems straightened, the yellow. Edges softened, as if the crops had felt a drop of water that wasn't there. Then they wilted again. Rowan's breath caught. That was not possible. Dead soil did not react to a child outside the dome. Broken systems did not fix themselves for 3 seconds and then fail again. That was a signal. That was a response. Rowan turned to the guards. Open the gate, he said. They laughed and told him to go back to work. He walked away like he accepted it, but his mind was racing. All his life he had studied how planets changed, how ecosystems spoke through, chemistry and pressure and growth patterns. And for the first time since arriving on Arda-7, he had seen the planet answer something. And that something was the silent boy they had just thrown away. That night, Rowan could not sleep. The hum returned under the floor, faint but steady, like a heartbeat coming from deep underground. In the agriculture bay, one small patch of seedlings had turned toward the outer wall, not toward the sun lamps. Toward the desert. Toward the place where Kaiao had been left alone. Rowan touched the soil and felt a rush of cold moisture in his mind, a memory that was not his. He pulled his hand back, breathing hard. The planet was not dead. It was trying to speak, and somehow the only person who could hear it was the child they had called useless. By dawn, Rowan had made his choice. If the colony was throwing away its only chance to survive, he would not stand by and watch. He loaded his rover with water, oxygen, and heat shields, and drove toward the outer gate without asking permission. Because sometimes saving a world begins with breaking a rule. The gate opened just long enough for Rowan to drive out, and the heat hit him like a wall. Red dust rolled across the ground, and the sky looked pale and empty, as if even the clouds had given up on this planet. The colony dome behind him already felt far away, like a place that had made a terrible mistake and didn't know it yet. Rowan followed the tracks left in the sand. At first they were clear, small footprints moving in a straight line, and the wind had started to erase them. After that, he followed something else, the low vibration he could feel through the rover's frame. It wasn't a sound. It was more like a pulse, slow and steady, coming from somewhere ahead. 3 hours later, he saw a small shape near a rock formation. K.I.O. was sitting in the thin shadow, knees pulled close, eyes half closed. His lips were dry, his breathing slow, but he was alive. Rowan jumped out and ran to him, offering water. K.I.O. drank without looking up, calm, like he knew Rowan would come. Then K.I.O. placed his hand on the ground. Rowan watched closely. The dust under K.I.O.'s palm darkened. Not much, just a faint change in color, but it was enough to show moisture. There was no water source here, no underground pipe, nothing in the scans. Yet the soil was becoming damp, as if something below had pushed a drop of life upward to meet the boy's hand. Rowan felt a chill despite the heat. "How are you doing that?" he asked softly. K.I.O. did not answer. He never answered. He just looked toward the horizon and pointed. His eyes were focused, almost urgent. Rowan followed the direction of his finger and saw nothing but distant ridges and red haze. "You want to go there?" Rowan asked. K.I.O. nodded once. Rowan hesitated. Going deeper into the desert meant risking both their lives. But staying here meant certain death when the sun climbed higher. And the strange pulse under the ground was growing stronger, almost like it was guiding them. He helped K.I.O. into the rover and drove Dot as they moved farther from the colony. The vibration became clearer. The rover's metal frame hummed softly, matching a rhythm that felt too steady to be natural. Rowan had studied seismic activity for years, and this was not random movement. This was patterned, like a heartbeat. They reached the top of a ridge, and Rowan stopped the rover. Dot below them was a valley that did not match any map. Tall structures rose from the soil, not quite plants and not quite stone. They were thin and flexible, with surfaces that looked like glass, filled with faint red light. Some leaned toward each other, almost touching, like they were part of a larger web. The entire valley shimmered gently, moving in slow waves. "This shouldn't exist," Rowan whispered. Terraforming scans had shown this region as completely barren. Yet here was something alive, something organized, something that looked less like a forest and more like a system. K.I.O. climbed out of the rover. Before Rowan could stop him, he walked down the slope without fear. As he stepped into the valley, the tall structures began to bend slightly toward him. Not quickly, not aggressively, but in a slow, careful motion, like they were recognizing him. Rowan followed, his heart pounding. A soft sound filled the air, a series of low clicks and hums that blended into one steady tone. The same tone Rowan had felt under the colony floor, the same pulse that had guided him here. K.I.O. stopped in the center of the valley and placed both hands. On one of the glowing stalks, the hum grew louder. Rowan stepped closer, and the moment he touched one of the structures, a rush of images flooded his mind. He saw water moving through underground channels, roots spreading across kilometers, a living network carrying nutrients and signals through the planet's crust. This was not a random growth. This was a planetary nervous system, ancient and wounded. Rowan pulled his hand back, breathing hard. He looked at Kio, who was standing perfectly still, eyes closed, surrounded by the glowing stalks that leaned toward him like listening ears. In that moment, Rowan understood the truth that the colony had missed. The planet was not dead. It had been trying to speak the entire time, and the only person who could hear it was the silent child they had thrown away. Rowan dropped to one knee, trying to slow his breathing. The images were still echoing in his head. Rivers under the ground, roots like glowing veins, a living system that stretched farther than any scanner had ever shown. This planet was not empty. It was injured. He looked at Kio. The boy's hands were still on the stalk, his face tense, as if he was carrying something heavy that no one else could see. The hum around them rose and fell in waves, and Rowan suddenly understood that it was not just a sound. It was information, signals moving through the network. "You can hear all of it, can't you?" Rowan whispered. Kio opened his eyes and looked at him. He did not smile. He did not nod. But Rowan felt the answer anyway, like a thought placed gently into his mind. Pain, not the boy's pain. The planet's. Rowan touched the ground again, more carefully this time. Another vision came, sharper than before. He saw the colony drills cutting deep into the crust, breaking the glowing root paths. He saw water channels collapse, soil drying from the inside out. The dying crops were not a mystery. The colony had damaged the system that fed them. Rowan pulled his hand away, shaken. "We did this," he said softly. "We're killing the thing that's keeping us alive." Kio stepped back from the stalk and pointed toward the distant direction of the colony. His expression had changed. There was urgency in it now. "You're showing me something else," Rowan said. The hum shifted, faster, uneven. Rowan closed his eyes and tried to listen the way Kio did, not with words, but with feeling. He sensed a huge section of the underground network going dark, like a heart losing its rhythm. If that part failed completely, the ground under the colony would collapse. The dome would crack. The air would escape. Rowan's eyes snapped open. The colony is going to fall. Kio grabbed his sleeve and pulled toward the rover. For the first time, the boy looked afraid. They drove back at full speed. The hum followed them, growing louder the closer they got to the dome. Dust storms were forming, spirals of red sand rising into the air, as if the planet itself was restless. When they reached the gate, security saw Kio and immediately raised their weapons. Rowan jumped out, shouting, "Don't shoot. He's the reason the ground is still stable." Governor Hale's voice came through the com speaker, cold and controlled. "Terraformer Voss, you are ordered to leave the child outside." Rowan didn't slow down. "If we leave him outside, we all die." People had gathered behind the glass, watching. The crops inside the agriculture bay were still weak, but as Kio stepped closer to the wall, a faint change passed through them. Leaves lifted slightly, the same impossible reaction Rowan had seen before. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Hale stepped into view, eyes fixed on Kio, not with relief, with calculation. "What exactly is he?" Hale asked. Rowan shook his head. "He's not a tool. He's connected to the planet. The ecosystem is alive, and we've been cutting through it like it's stone. It's failing. If it collapses, the colony goes with it." Hale's expression hardened. "Then we study him. we find out how the connection works. Two guards moved toward KIO. Rowan stepped in front of them. You don't understand. If you treat him like an experiment, you'll lose the only bridge you have. KIO placed his palm on the metal floor. The vibration surged through the hall. Lights flickered. A crack appeared in a dry plant tray, and from the broken soil, a thin green shoot pushed upward, twisting toward KIO's hand. Gasps filled the room. For a moment, hope appeared on a few faces. But Hale saw something else. Control. Take him to the research wing, Hale ordered quietly. Rowan felt a wave of dread. Hale did not see a child. He saw a resource. As the guards led KIO away, the hum in the floor changed again, faster, unstable, like a warning that was running out of time. Rowan knew, the moment they took KIO into the research wing, that something was very wrong. The hum under the floor was no longer steady. It was sharp, uneven, like a heart beating too fast before it stops. People thought the shaking was just another system failure, but Rowan had felt the planet's rhythm. This was different. He pushed through the corridor toward the lab doors, but they were sealed. Through the small glass panel, he saw KIO strapped into a metal chair, cables being prepared, scanners aimed at his head. The researchers spoke quickly, excited, like they had found a machine instead of a child. Once we map the signal source, one of them said, we can replicate it without him. Rowan's stomach dropped. They didn't want to understand the connection. They wanted to replace it. Inside the lab, Kaya's eyes were open, fixed on the floor. His hands were clenched, and the hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls. Tray of soil samples on a nearby table began to tremble. Tiny cracks formed in the dry dirt. Rowan banged on the door. Stop! You're hurting the network. Governor Hall stepped into the hallway behind him. We're saving the colony, Hale replied calmly. If the boy is the key, we use the key. You can't force this, Rowan shouted. He's not controlling it. He's listening to it. Hale folded his arms. Then we'll make it listen to us. Inside the lab, the first cable touched KIO's temple. At that exact second, every light in the corridor flickered. Not just a blink. A long, dim pulse, like the colony itself had lost strength. Rowan felt it in his chest, a sudden emptiness, as if something vast had pulled away. Then the ground shook. A deep crack ran along the lab floor, splitting the metal panels. Soil from the plant samples spilled out, and from that soil thin root-like strands pushed upward, glowing faintly red. The researchers stepped back in shock. Kaio gasped silently, his body trembling, and Rowan understood the twist that changed everything. Boy was not the source of the connection. He was the regulator, the only thing keeping the planet calm. By forcing the link, they were not gaining control. They were removing the balance that kept the ecosystem from reacting. The hum became a roar. Across the colony, metal supports groaned. Storage tanks rattled. In the agriculture bay, rows of dead crops suddenly surged upward, growing wildly, cracking their trays, bursting through their restraints as if trying to reach something beyond the walls. People screamed. Hale's calm expression finally broke. What is happening? Rowan turned to him, breathless. You just removed the filter. The planet isn't talking anymore. It's reacting. Inside the lab, the cables sparked and burned out. KIO collapsed forward, unconscious. The glowing roots from the spilled soil spread across the floor, racing toward the walls, disappearing into the cracks like they were reconnecting to something deeper. A voice came over the emergency speakers. Structural instability detected. Foundation layers shifting. The colony wasn't just shaking. It was sinking. Hale grabbed Rowan's arm. Fix it. Rowan pulled free. I told you how. We don't control the system. We cooperate with it. And right now, the only one it trusts is him. They rushed into the lab. Rowan tore the restraints loose and lifted KIO carefully. The boy was pale, barely conscious, his hand weakly reaching toward the floor. The hum softened slightly when Rowan let KIO's fingers touch the metal, but it was unstable, like a storm that could return any second. Rowan looked at Hal, his voice sharp. This is your last chance. You either help me reconnect the network the right way, or this dome collapses. For the first time since Rowan had known him, Hal had no answer, because the colony's greatest discovery was also its greatest mistake. They had tried to control a living world dot, and now the world was waking up. The colony alarms would not stop. Red lights flashed across every corridor, and the metal floor tilted so slightly that people did not notice at first, but Rowan felt it. The entire dome was sinking, millimeter by millimeter, into soil that no longer wanted to hold it. He carried KIO through the chaos, past running workers, past shattered equipment, past rows of crops that had grown too fast and then collapsed again. The hum followed them, loud, unstable, like a storm trapped under the ground. Outer gate, Rowan said into the com. Open it now? No one answered. Governor Hale's voice finally came through, tight and shaken. If we open the gate, we lose pressure. If you don't, Rowan replied, you lose the colony. A long pause. Then the locks disengaged. Hot desert air rushed in as Rowan stepped outside with KIO in his arms. The Valley of Living. Stalks shimmered in the distance, but the glow was fading. The network was breaking apart, one section at a time. Rowan placed KIO gently on the ground at the edge of the valley. You don't have to do this, he said softly. We'll find another way. KIO opened his eyes. He was weak, but there was no fear in his face now. Slowly, he pressed both hands into the soil. The hum returned, deeper than before. The ground beneath the valley lit up with lines of red and gold, spreading outward like a heartbeat traveling through veins. The tall stalks straightened, their glow growing brighter, and the air filled with that soft clicking chorus. Inside the dome, the shaking slowed. Engineers watched their monitors in disbelief. Foundation pressure stabilizing, one of them whispered. The soil density is increasing. Something is supporting us from below. Rowan felt the planet's presence again, not angry this time, but exhausted. It was not trying to destroy the colony. It was trying to survive, and it needed the colony to stop hurting it. Kao's hands trembled. The connection was too strong. Rowan realized the truth with a sharp fear. If Kao stayed the bridge, the strain would destroy him. He grabbed his terraforming injector and drove it into the central stalk, linking the colony's power feed through his portable core. Redirecting energy to the network, he said into the com. We're building a permanent interface. The planet carries the load, not the child. Power surged through the cable. The glowing lines in the ground expanded, weaving into a stable pattern. The hum smoothed into a slow, steady rhythm. KIO collapsed forward, and Rowan caught him, pulling him away from the soil. The network did not break. For the first time, it continued without him. Inside the colony, the floor leveled. Cracks stopped spreading. The wild plant growth settled into normal, steady green. Oxygen levels began to rise as new root channels opened beneath the agriculture bays, feeding moisture back into the trays. Governor Hawley stepped out of the dome, walking slowly toward Rowan and Kaio. He looked smaller than before, the confidence gone from his posture. Around him, colonists gathered in silence, watching the valley glow like a living heart. Hawley stopped, a few steps away. The systems are stable, he said quietly. The ground is holding. We're alive. Rowan nodded, still focused on Kao's breathing. Because we stopped trying to control it. Hale looked at the glowing network beneath the soil. It was never dead, was it? No, Rowan answered. It was waiting for us to listen. Kao stirred slightly in Rowan's arms. His eyes opened, and for the first time since the beginning, he looked not at the ground, not at the distant valley, but at the people standing around him. A farmer stepped forward and knelt, placing a small tray of healthy green seedlings on. The soil. No one spoke. No one blamed. They simply watched. Kao reached out and touched one leaf. It did not grow wildly. It did not crack its container. It just straightened gently, alive and calm. The hum in the ground echoed softly, like approval. In the weeks that followed, the colony changed. Drilling stopped. Terraforming became cooperation instead of conquest. Sensors were rebuilt to translate the planet's signals, so no child would ever have to carry that weight alone again. Water returned to the soil through the restored underground channels, and the first real trees began to grow near the dome. Kao never spoke in words, but he no longer needed to. He walked freely through the agriculture bays, touching soil, guiding the new systems, while engineers watched the monitors that now pulsed in time with the planet's slow rhythm. One evening, Rowan stood beside him at the edge of the valley, looking at the glowing network stretching beneath the surface. "Do you still hear it?" Rowan asked. Kao nodded. "Is it angry?" Rowan asked. Kao shook his head. Rowan smiled faintly. "What is it saying?" Kao placed his hand on the ground, then took Rowan's hand and placed it beside his own. The hum rose, steady and warm. And Rowan understood the message without words. Not a warning, not a threat, an agreement. As long as they listened, they could stay. The silent child the colony had rejected was never broken. He was the first bridge between two living worlds. And because one man chose to follow a faint vibration in the soil, instead of the fear of a crowd, an entire civilization learned the difference between surviving on a planet and living with it.